In 1973, audiences stood in lines like this one to see what would become the most notorious horror film in cinema history. But the terror projected on screen was a sanitized version of a tightly guarded, true 1949 case. The actual subject of the events was a 14-year-old boy operating under the pseudonym Roland. He survived weeks of severe, documented physical possession and recovered so completely that he grew up to become a rocket scientist for NASA. Before the haunting began, Roland's life mirrored this exact image of a typical American family. He was an ordinary teenager growing up in a quiet suburb in the late 1940s, focused entirely on schoolwork and neighborhood games. The anomaly began with a visit from his aunt, Tilly. She introduced Roland to a board game exactly like the one shown here, instructing him on how to place his hands on the planchette to attempt communication with the dead. With Tilly's sudden death shortly after that visit, the board became Roland's primary connection to her. He continued playing the game alone in the weeks leading up to the first physical anomalies recorded in the house. The physical manifestations started entirely within the walls. At night, the family began hearing rhythmic scratching sounds echoing through the home. Assuming it was a routine pest problem, they dismissed the noises as mice. Soon the sounds escalated. The quiet scratching grew violent, and it was quickly accompanied by the distinct sound of a human crying. Investigating the noise in the dark, the parents discovered Roland crouched on the floor, his fingers physically clawing into the wood of the floorboards. When they demanded to know what he was doing, Roland turned to them and delivered a terrifying admission. He told them he wasn't doing it. Someone else was forcing his body to act. An invisible threat had successfully breached their domestic space. The parents realized immediately that their natural authority was completely powerless against whatever had taken control of their child. The entity refused to stay confined to the house. In a setting much like this mid-century classroom, Roland began hurling objects at his peers and speaking in unidentifiable guttural languages. Desperate for a rational explanation, Roland's mother turned to medical science, pulling him from school and bringing him to a clinical psychologist for a full evaluation. Despite the violent physical outbursts and sudden behavioral changes, the psychologist concluded that Roland was entirely healthy. Science had no diagnostic language for the phenomena occurring in the home. With medicine exhausted, the family took their first step into the spiritual realm. They contacted a local clergyman, Father Luther Miles Schultz, who agreed to monitor the boy overnight. Schultz observed impossible physics. He watched a heavy rocking chair rotate in perfect circles rather than rock back and forth before it violently threw Roland to the floor. Spontaneous scratches then began appearing across the boy's skin. When both medical observation and basic local logic failed to address the physical reality in front of them, the family had no choice but to escalate their response to ancient institutional interventions. They brought Roland to the office of a Catholic priest named Father Hughes. Almost immediately after Roland sat down, a heavy telephone slid rapidly across the desk on its own and shattered on the floor. Following the crash, a distinct demonic secondary voice emerged from Roland's throat, proving to the priest that a powerful external force was occupying the boy. The entity then weaponized Roland's biology. Deep, bloody scratches raised out of his flesh, spelling a single word across his torso. There, the local archbishop authorized a severe response. He assigned Father William Bowdern, supported by a paranormal investigator, to officially step in and assess the situation. The 800-mile journey to Missouri failed to leave the manifestations behind. In St. Louis, the violence simply resumed in a new house, now under the observation of a different set of witnesses. Father Bowdern and his team initiated the strict ancient rites of a Roman Catholic exorcism over Roland. The rituals provoked an immediate kinetic reaction. Roland's body defied gravity, lifting off his mattress and levitating directly in midair. Any priest or family member who attempted to approach or restrain the boy was met with physical attacks. The entity lashed out, biting and striking with unnatural force. The initial days of the exorcism failed completely. During daylight hours, Roland presented as a perfectly normal 14-year-old, but the moment the sun set, his body erupted into a violently uncontrollable state. Exposing the demon to standard religious rituals did not weaken it. The rites provoked the entity, forcing it to display its full, highly adaptive physical power. Realizing the home environment was too dangerous, the priests took a final extreme measure. They removed Roland from domestic life and locked him inside a long Catholic hospital psychiatric ward, identical in layout to this one. Inside the ward, the violence peaked. Roland tore a sacred purple shawl directly off a priest and stood rigidly suspended in midair, entirely motionless. The priests deployed their most aggressive spiritual weapon. They placed a physical statue of Saint Michael the Archangel directly in front of the suspended boy. The sight of the statue triggered a breaking point. Roland's limbs contorted severely as the priests doused him in holy water. Suddenly, his body collapsed back onto the bed, and he whispered quietly that the entity was gone. The entity was defeated only when cornered in a locked room and confronted with the historical symbol of spiritual warfare. It vanished, leaving behind nothing but profound physical and psychological exhaustion. In the immediate aftermath, a figure resembling St. Michael's shadow was spotted at a nearby church. Inside the hospital, the priests gathered their tools, locked their ritual books away in the ward, and varied the details of the case. Despite surviving weeks of intense supernatural trauma, Roland simply returned to his normal life. He went back to high school, blending in perfectly with his peers. He did not succumb to madness. Instead, he pursued his education and eventually secured a career working on rockets like this one as a highly successful scientist for NASA. The 1949 case remains an outlier, not just for the severity of the events, but for the silence that followed. Roland's life suggests that reality can be violently upended for a time, only to settle back into a state of absolute quiet normalcy.